Joining us for our SAMTalk, Starting the Conversation. My name is Kate Celius, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Samaritan House. This is the fifth session, if you can believe it, in our speaker series focused on issues surrounding domestic violence and human trafficking. Our guests are experts in their field, survivors, and others who connect with Samaritan House in these topics in some way. Our goal is to share their experience, strength, and hope with you, the viewer. Knowledge is power, so we want to empower you, our community. Thank you for allowing us to do that today. Thank you for starting the conversation. My guest today is Alana Flora, Chief Operating Officer for the Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice, or AFRJ for short. She oversees all operations, including onboarding and managing all team members, developing and implementing all projects, handling all corporate filings, and particularly stewarding the Engage Together initiative designed to equip and mobilize both individuals and entire communities. Alana will talk about this a little bit later. Through her work with Samaritan House, I know personally that Alana is passionate about equipping justice advocates with the resources needed to provide a deeper understanding of the issues and helping each person know how they can specifically and uniquely engage. She assists leaders in many different sectors, professionals in many different fields, and concerned citizens, perhaps like yourself, seeking to learn how they can make an impact. Alana also builds and maintains relationships with thousands of advocates in the field, like those at Samaritan House. Prior to her work with AFRJ, Alana served as a court-appointed special advocate for children in foster care, a substitute teacher, and a nonprofit volunteer. While pursuing her law degree, she interned with the local juvenile justice system, studied international human rights abroad, and focused on efforts to assist families in need. Needless to say, Alana has a lot to contribute to the conversation on trafficked youth. I'm looking forward to our talk. Now, today we're going to be talking about kind of connecting the dots to eliminate child and youth trafficking. Youth are more vulnerable for a variety of reasons. Their age, developmental capacity related to that age, legal dependency on abusive adults, rejection by their family or community. For example, a trend we are seeing in our transgender youth right now, and a history of trauma or abuse or secondary trauma from witnessing violence in their home. Alana, are there vulnerabilities or risk factors beyond those I just mentioned that youth traffickers can exploit, or can you speak to any of these that I mentioned?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Kate. It's so great to be with you all and big fans of your work. And I'm so glad today that we're talking about vulnerabilities, because so often what we're seeing is that human trafficking is that end result of those vulnerabilities in our communities not being addressed. And so if we're not talking about it and connecting those dots like we're going to talk about today, that's where I see traffickers coming in and preying upon those vulnerabilities. So in addition to the many that you listed, I would also add and include foster youth. A lot of times foster youth are being moved from placement to placement. They're being put in a new school. They're not fitting in. They don't feel like they fit with their family. They maybe don't have the latest technology or the cool backpack and jacket. And so a trafficker is going to come in and be able to say, I can provide that need. No one else understands. I know what that's like. You also see family members that are not as welcoming maybe to some of the youth in their lives. And so we see youth that are facing that rejection and they're ending up homeless. And so traffickers, again, coming in to meet that tangible need. You have a lot of children and youth that are being abused in the home, whether that's physically, sexually, mentally, or emotionally. And so they develop this false mindset that a trafficker preys upon, that maybe that's all they're worth, or I'll promise you something different, and then it really turns on them. And so a lot of times these vulnerabilities are either tangible, physical, mental, or emotional, that traffickers are coming in. And I just want to note as well that it doesn't happen to only one type of person, right? There's not one type of youth, one type of child. It's happening across all socioeconomic backgrounds. So it's not just that part of town or not this part of town. Because at the core, again, traffickers are really looking to exploit, to fill that void in need that a youth might be feeling.
Mm-hmm. And I heard, thank you for that. I heard recently too that 1 in 7 runaway youths are trafficked. So that, I think that's another area to kind of add to that. that grouping. So why might it be difficult for a young victim to self-identify as a human trafficking victim, or they might resist leaving abusive situations?
We get this conversation all the time when I'm talking with folks, and a lot of times those that are caught in human trafficking, they have no idea the term human trafficking. They've never heard it used, so it's not something that they would self-identify. They're not going to raise their hand and go, "This is what's happening to me." I was recently talking with a survivor, and she said, "I did not know that term my entire time that I was being trafficked, and I've only recently learned what it was." I've seen witnesses that were interviewed by detectives, and they say, "My boyfriend just took my money," and the detective says, "Well, let me define trafficking," and they walk through everything, and the victim still says, "No, that was still just my boyfriend." And so there's this disconnect on understanding that this is a crime, perhaps, that is happening to them. And so they just oftentimes see it as maybe a relationship that they're in that's being mistreated. But the common question that you often get, I think, in domestic violence as well as in trafficking is, why don't they just leave, right? There's not really chains in this situation. They're not locked in a room. I see them out on the street. What's going on? Why aren't they just leaving? And it's hard to explain, but it's important to know that there's a lot of mental bond and mental hold that is happening. So threats have been made against them, threats against their family members. "I know where your brother or sister goes to school. I know where your parents work. I will come after them." They've seen the physical threats and the physical manifestations to others in what they call a stable that are with them. And so there's a lot of fear. And so it's this bond that's mental and emotional that is really an invisible chain. And that a lot of times is why we're not seeing them maybe run off.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it crossovers to domestic violence as well. It takes an average of, I think it's 7 or 9 times to leave an abuser for many of those same reasons, that emotional hold, those threats made against them, financial holds, things like that. So yeah, it's across the board. So before this talk, I was talking to a colleague of mine, asking her what she would want to hear today. She's in our human trafficking department. And she offered up this question, which I think is a very important one. What is the difference between exploitation and abuse versus trafficking, especially in children?
So a lot of times it's this continuum that we're seeing of harm. So we're seeing abuse really about harm, physical, mental, emotional, and really in the context of the law, we're seeing that is time for an intervention that we see, right? Social services kind of coming in. A lot of times it could be singular instance, doesn't have to be, but we're seeing that harm caused. Exploitation is we're seeing this power dynamic evolve, right? So we have someone that's coming in, and it could also be over a longer period of time. So they're exerting their position, their power over someone to do something. That's a lot of times where we see grooming start, or we may see that some photos were exchanged and then that went to videos, and then suddenly we're in a whole new dynamic of exploitation at a different level, over and over and over. And then when we see trafficking, now in the definition of it, it requires force, fraud, or coercion, but it's so important to note that for minors, that is absolutely not required. All we have to see is this, and for a commercial sex act, if we're talking about sex trafficking, this exchange of value. That doesn't necessarily mean monetary. So sometimes we'll look and we'll go, well, there wasn't an exchange of money. It's for anything of value. So I worked with a task force that recovered a minor that the exchange of the sexual act was for a hamburger. She was just hungry and hadn't been fed. And so she, was exploited in that way. And she was trafficked over and over from that point. And so we see this continuum between abuse, power dynamics, and then exchange of value.
Absolutely. And of course, control, we all know, is a big part of that power dynamic, is a big part of the problem, and kind of defines the issue, really. So your agency works with other agencies across the board. You see a lot regionally, you see a lot nationally. For the folks listening in, is there a difference between what happens to youths who are arrested for theft or drug possession or prostitution, delinquency, versus if the arrests are direct results of human trafficking? I don't even know is there a difference, and maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, so there can be. It's definitely going to vary state by state, and it's going to determine whether or not law enforcement has been identified this victim as someone who committed that crime while they were under the duress of being trafficked. So if they haven't properly screened and understand the dynamics of the entire situation, so if they look at it singularly and go, that was a threat, that was theft, that was identity theft, using that debit card to purchase this, they may only look at it in an isolated way and charge for that crime. If they're looking at it holistically and know the questions to screen and ask for and those indicators to pick up on, they may be able to see that this was related to trafficking, in which case for that minor, they may be able to determine that there are laws in place that protect that youth and that the youth would immediately get services. And then depending again on the state laws, would then look to see what other charges may be brought. But that victim-centered approach is always at the forefront if we can bridge that connection between that original crime and trafficking.
Right. I mean, it's just the fact that it varies from state to state, and there isn't some kind of federal regulation on this, and handbook, as it were, not regulation, but handbook on the how-tos, does speak to the issue, I think, a lot. So let's get to this Engage Together program. Tell me about Engage Together.
So Engage Together exists to come alongside those that are working in the field that maybe don't know who else is working in the field, right? So they may not know what's happening in Boston or Minneapolis or San Antonio. And so we're building relationships with folks in the field, and I'm learning what's working, what's not working, what are new trends we're seeing with traffickers, what are new laws that are being passed, what are new resources that have been created, so that we can share that information among providers. We're also helping people understand, okay, I've learned about trafficking, what can I do? And helping them see you are uniquely and perfectly positioned to come alongside. You've already got gifts, talents, resources, network. And so when they're asking that question, what do we do? What already exists? I think I want to start this. I think I want to create this. We're able to say, take a look at what exists, maybe learn from them before you go and start something and recreate that wheel. But also figure out, what's going on in your own community, because we need everyone. So we work across all sectors, helping them understand whether that's a business, a foundation, a university student. So that is what this conversation is so exciting for us, because it's our heartbeat too, right? Connecting those dots, people that are already working with populations like domestic violence and sexual assault, homeless and runaway youth, foster care, juvenile justice. Whether you're at a large level every day engaging or it's a singular instance, how can you come alongside your community and bridge those connections so that we know how to really holistically address human trafficking and all those vulnerabilities that lead to it?
Exactly. Well, and speaking of these communities, we are one of them. For those who are unfamiliar, the Hampton Roads Human Trafficking Task Force, started in 2017 by then Attorney General Mark Herring, comprises the Virginia Office of the Attorney General, Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia, local law enforcement, Samaritan House on the South Side, and Transitions Family Violence Services on the Peninsula. So you've collaborated with Samaritan House for a while now, Alana. Your work with Samaritan House and the Hampton Roads and with your work on the Hampton Roads Human Trafficking Task Force, what connections have you seen emerge?
So it's been so great to see Samaritan House come to the table and say, hey, we know that we're serving these victims as well. And how can we do that really great and excellent and partner with those in the community? And so programs like CHKD, they've come alongside. I've seen your outreach and awareness really build the knowledge of the community by reaching out to businesses and churches and community members. So it's been really great for you guys to be able to bring that knowledge to the community and then also build those relationships to best serve those that are in your care.
Yeah, and I know you and I were talking earlier about community foundations, civic groups like Junior League, Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, and like you said, universities. I work a lot with these groups. It is eye-opening. I think I need to go back to the drawing board and do some more work. Let's see. I wanted to share with the folks listening in today on some statistics. It is Teen Violence Awareness Month. So we've got some staggering statistics. 1 in 11 females, 1 in 14 male students are going to report physical dating violence or reported physical dating violence in this last year. And teens who experience dating violence are at risk for long-term consequences like disordered eating, substance use disorders, and violent behaviors. And those violent behaviors sadly often begin between 6th and 12th grade. Like you said, youth from culturally diverse backgrounds are 2 times as more likely to be trafficked than white youth. And then, like we mentioned before too, the 1 in 7 runaway teens are trafficked each year. So I know you were saying it's important that we discuss the warning signs of abuse in relationships, especially in teens in this month. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, it's so important that we have that, because in talking about warning signs, we also are talking about healthy relationships. And that's critical, whether you are with a youth group, an after school program, or working with teenagers in any capacity, discussing what healthy relationships are, good boundaries, warning signs. A lot of times you don't have a frame of reference, because what they've seen in their family, community, or in culture has shaped what a relationship would look like. And so if that's harmful and a trafficker comes in and just displays those harmful behaviors, they don't know any different. And so it would be empowering to them to understand what a good, healthy relationship is and how to get help if they're not in that.
Right. And it's important to acknowledge our primary prevention specialist here at Samaritan House as well. Her goal is to work with young people in the community to stop violence before it happens, facilitating educational programming for young people, focusing on domestic violence, anti-trafficking, prevention strategies, how to look for warning signs in their peers, because your peers are going to tell their peers before they tell their parents or a teacher often. She's presented at local high schools, tried to have those tough conversations with people who are at risk for experiencing violence in their life. So we're definitely glad to have her. Now, just to kind of wrap up, before we wrap up, Samaritan House recently broke ground on the new trafficked youth shelter, the Hallow. Meeting the needs of the community has long been a long-standing tradition of Samaritan House. The creation of the Hallow is no different. We identified a need for safe, healing space for minors who are escaping the throes of human trafficking. The Hallow will be a 24-hour facility. We'll house 8 young girls or teens with 1 additional ADA compliant room. And this will be a unique facility and give us the opportunity to help young women and girls right here in Hampton Roads. You can visit Samaritan House's webpage to learn more about this exciting project if you like at SamaritanHouseVA.org. But while we're sharing where they can get resources, Alana, where can organizations and individuals watching this today go to seek out more information about AFRJ, or in particular, Engage Together?
Absolutely. So we've got resources, action kits, toolkits, blogs at engagetogether.com.
Awesome. And then last, just kind of on this note, resources, what can they do? So what can these folks do right now in 6 months, a year, and beyond to help the effort?
It's so important to know that in all those timeframes you can do something. So first, learn what trafficking looks like in your community. If you're in Hampton Roads, reach out to Samaritan House and the task force to understand, so that you're not trying to create something based on something you think you know about trafficking. Second, find out what exists, what efforts they're building, what are the needs that Samaritan House or the Hallows or their programs or your community needs, and then who are you? Are you someone that can help fill that need in education or finance or landscaping that they might need there? And then look to see, can I enhance what I'm already doing? Can I come alongside their efforts, or is there something that I can fill a gap that may be needed? So those are all 3 ways. Again, some will be today, some will be 6 months, and some will be a year, but that's how we encourage people to take a look at how they can engage.
Wonderful. I'm going to wrap it up for the SAMTalk today. Thank you so much, Alana. It was a real pleasure having you this evening. I hope our viewers got as much out of it as I did, and that was a lot. So if you liked what you saw today and wish to make a financial contribution to Samaritan House, you can text SAM to 50155. We greatly appreciate anything you can give. We can't do it without supporters like you. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please call our 24-hour emergency crisis hotline, 757-430-2120. That's 757-430-2120. Thank you for joining us for the SAMTalk. Until next time.